Major, first of all, how did you get to know Rob Miller?
I got to know Rob in June of 2007 when I joined ODA 372 at the time.
And how did he strike you as a soldier, as a leader?
When I got to the team, Rob was still at Ranger School, so he was just coming off of Ranger School. And at the time, he was young. Rob was a young guy, but he was a go-getter. He was the guy on the team that we could always rely on. Definitely young and full of energy.
Jennifer, can we get a flash? I'm sorry.
Thank you. Now we got to start over.
Dang it.
We'll start over. All right. That was a good rehearsal. Perfect.
So June, remember two things. June 2007.
Yep, and
in Ranger School.
He was still Ranger School, correct?
I sent him to Ranger School.
When did he go? March?
No, it was June.
June.
Because we got back in March, April time frame, right before Easter.
Because I graduated
in April. What do you mean you got back in April?
From Afghanistan.
From Afghanistan,
Okay,
we
so you
took
went
leave,
in
and then he went in
Okay.
April.
Because I graduated in April.
Okay.
Yeah.
You going again, sir?
Yeah, we're going to get.
Okay.
It was before then.
So, as you were saying, you got to know him just as he was coming out of Ranger School?
I got to know Rob just as he was coming out of Ranger School, July, August time frame. He was a teammate of ours on ODA 372. He was my junior Bravo at the time, which he's a weapons sergeant, young and full of energy.
What was he like as a person in those days?
Rob, he was a go-getter. He was a guy on the team that I could really rely on to get things done. Whenever we asked for something, Rob would get it done. But again, he was young, so there were things that we had to explain to him. And some of the older guys didn't have much patience for Robbie just because he was such a young guy, and he was getting to learn the Army as well on the detachment.
And let's see, Sergeant Major.
Yes.
You knew him a little bit earlier in the pipeline, so to speak.
I did.
How did you first get to know him?
I received, believe it or not, I got Robbie right out of the course. He was a 23-year-old, what we called at the time 18 X-ray, which at the start of 9/11 we started receiving Special Forces soldiers straight from basic training. I don't know if you're familiar with that. And he came right to the team, very energetic, 23-year-old skateboarding, kid, and very respectful, very intelligent, and just ready to work type of young man.
How did you know he was cut out for this kind of thing?
His discipline, joke, we're pretty relaxed on an SFODA. So as a master sergeant who had, at the time, probably 18 years of service, and he had 3 traditional special forces teams, we're pretty first name basis after a while. Well, I knew he was an X-ray. It was my first 18 X-ray that I experienced, so he would say master sergeant, which the correct term is sergeant if you're gonna, so probably 2 months he called me master sergeant. He was very disciplined, and whatever I asked him to do, he was ready to do and execute, and he just was a very disciplined young man, and a pleasure to have on the team. Like Major Cusick said, some guys had to be, because he was younger than the most of us, so he had a little learning curve to go through. So.
Is the correct appellation Mr. Wilson?
Mr. Chief, either.
That's what I'm asking, Chief.
Whatever you want to call me, should be
I
fine.
want to make sure I'm right. Chief, how did you first get to know him?
I was on the detachment when Rob first showed up to sign into the detachment. At that time, I was a medic on the detachment, so I was an NCO at that time.
Was that during his first tour or his second tour?
First.
Before his first tour.
Okay, how did he strike you? What can you say about him when you first got to meet him that you can say?
At that time, my mentality was a little different. Once again, I was the NCO, so I was one of the guys that kind of rode him hard, see what he could actually put up with, how he handled himself under stress. He, like the Sergeant Major was saying, very intelligent, adapts really well, and what Major Cusick was saying, I mean, the go-getter, the person that you could rely on no matter what you'd say, like, hey, I need this done no matter what it was. You can guarantee that that person would, go out of his way to do it. And that's exactly what Robbie was.
He was cut out for this, wasn't he?
Yes, he was.
I want to kind of fast forward a little bit. This would have been Rob's second tour. Did you know him during his first tour?
I did not. Rob was with Sergeant Major on his first tour, and then Sergeant Major had switched out at some point between the first and second tour.
Then I'll ask Sergeant Major about that. You were with him on his first
I was.
tour, and he didn't say very much about it based on what I've heard from his mother and his friends. He didn't say a whole lot about what he did, but he had already won 2 commendations there.
Right.
What can you tell me about that?
In fact, myself and the team leader prior to Major Cusick had put him in for those awards. They were our Army Commendation Medals with Valor. We'd been in a couple firefights in almost a location where the Medal of Honor action had taken place. I mean, within a mile, to be honest with you, where it happened, less than a mile. And he performed to a T. I mean, he got out and executed our basic battle drills there, and was just a stellar leader of pushing our fighters with us. And he's just a very relied upon young man that just you would not know that he was as young as he was. He was older than what his age projected there.
His mom told me later that he heard from at least one person who had been in on some of those actions that if it weren't been for the kinds of things that he had done, maybe everybody would have been killed.
Yes, there was, and I have, I got pictures from. We had actually a interpreter that took a lot of. Instead of firing, he was taking pictures. So we have plenty of pictures that'll dictate, what he did during some of the firefights we were in. It was pretty amazing, but absolutely. I mean, he just took charge. He listened real well. Robbie could conform to his senior, who's not here with us now at the time. He's a master sergeant in another company, but I mean, he was a sponge. He would listen to everything that from that point that we were talking prior to the first deployment to that deployment. I mean, he soaked everything in, and he was born to do this. He really was, and I always reflect back to my first meeting where I counsel everybody that comes to the team, and just our first meetings and the things he said were just he was born to do what he was doing with us, and fully believed in. He left college, University of Iowa, because he so believed in what was going on and wanted to be a part of it. So
I've heard where he was the person who was acting as translator on all this stuff because he could speak Pashto.
He could speak almost 5 different languages. He was just one of those people that can pick up on languages on his own, and he would go down. As being a weapons sergeant, generally on a team, you're the guy that's going to tactically get with our fighting force and train them. So he would spend evenings, after training or whatever the day's business was in Afghanistan, with the interpreters and with the our fighters, and just talking with them and learning the dialect, and he just picked up on it quick. So that bonded our team with our fighters, or our Afghan National Army fighters that we had with us. So it was such a huge bond that he brought to the team, just closing that gap. So he was well respected amongst them at a young age, and
that's priceless.
Oh, you can't pay for that. You're right, absolutely priceless, and it was just a huge thing and that brought with the village, so those fighters told their families, hey, this is, and he would talk with them. So it just tied a lot bigger than just local team members. So.
Major first and chief. Did you see some of that too when you were with him in the second tour? That he was able to blend in and gain the confidence of the locals?
Absolutely. There were several times we had to tell Rob that he could not go over into the village to attend a wedding or to attend an event with the families in the villages. And it was for force protection reasons. Even though Rob did have a good bond with the people, we were also limited by our rules and regulations. So there were often times I had to tell Rob no, he couldn't go do something at the invite of the Afghans. So there were quite some times where I had to tell Rob no because he was invited to an event on behalf of the family or the village itself in Afghanistan.
That really speaks to the kind of bond he had with the people that we're working with and defending and working with.
Absolutely.
Chief, did you see that kind of thing too?
Yeah, there's not much more than I can add but what Bob did. I mean, there's everything he said is just, spot on.
I want to move ahead to the action. Set the stage for us, Major. Where were you when? What was the mission that you were on when things started to go bad? I know that there was one initial action, and then afterward, I believe after an airstrike, that you went up to check what had been hit.
Correct.
Could you set the stage for us, please?
We were in northeast Afghanistan. The provinces were Konar and Nuristan province. We were going out to do a combat reconnaissance patrol for some road workers that had been kidnapped by the Taliban at the time. So we were going to do a combat reconnaissance patrol. And when the assets, some of the aircraft had checked on or checked in with us, they were seeing some movements up in that part of the country. When they started seeing those movements, we just changed our combat reconnaissance patrol from one valley to that valley. So later on in the night, we were able to go up into that valley, confirm that there truly were enemy fighters there, and we engaged those enemy fighters. After we engaged those enemy fighters, we had our JTAC, or our Joint Air Traffic Controller, our Air Force component. He helped us engage those enemy fighters. And after we engaged those enemy fighters kinetically, we went in to do battle damage assessment, or BDA as it's known. We went into the village to do BDA, and that's just part of our rules and regulations to ensure that no civilians are killed. We haven't hurt any women and children. And during the battle damage assessment, that's when Robbie was killed, and subsequently we were ambushed.
It was past a bridge, as I understand it?
Yeah, it was the setting on the ground, snow, about 20 degrees out, very mountainous terrain, 60, 70 degree slopes. And we were on a road with our trucks overwatching these enemy fighters moving, putting security outside of a house at that location. Once we identified weapons, we engaged the enemy forces. We had to cross a bridge known as the Gowardesh Bridge to get on the other side of the river. Our trucks were on the near side of the river. So to get on that other side, after we engaged the enemy, we had to cross that bridge there, and that was known as the Gowardesh Bridge. En route up to that location, we believe, and it's still a mystery, we encountered two boulders that were probably in place by the enemy fighters. We had to reduce those boulders and use explosives, so we think that was some early warning for the enemy to know that we're coming in to that area.
And when did the Taliban engage you at that point?
We had an RPG fired at the lead element, or our lead vehicle. We also had a coalition force element attached to us that night. They had an RPG fired at their front element from that same enemy group that we believed were enemy. So the minute we had an RPG fired at that lead vehicle, we began engaging the enemy.
And when did it appear? Did it occur to you that wow, there's more people here than we had any idea?
As guys on the ground, we originally believed that we had the superiority, and we did the first 3 hours. We used all assets available, our own night vision, our own thermal systems, the aircraft that were above us, to see if we had reduced the enemy enough to go in and do battle damage assessment. Utilizing all my men and all the aircraft that were with us that night, they said there are no more enemy fighters. That's when we went into the village, crossed the bridge.
Can you pick it up from there?
I don't know. Do you want me to elaborate a little bit more?
Talk about the trucks. What happened
Okay.
to the trucks and what you saw.
The aircraft before, as Major Cusick was talking about, they actually saw enemy fighters just the way that they were walking, their formation. They went into a building, and when we changed our combat reconnaissance patrol from one valley to the next, this building was kind of at the base of this valley. As we drove up to it, again, the two boulders that were in the road, We reached the first one, too big to move with the vehicles. We had to actually blow it. The next one was probably about 600 meters from where we were kind of parallel with the compound that was our compound of interest. As we drove up, the terrain was just ridiculous. To the west was a very large mountain chain. Then next thing to the east was the narrow road that we were on. You go off the road further to the east, and you have the river, which I don't know how many people have died trying to cross that thing. Then you get to the other side of the river further to the east, and you have a little flat area, which is the base of the valley, and then the valley goes up to the northeast into Gaudash. This compound, which was our compound of interest that they actually identified fighters going into, was at the base of this valley. As we came up with the trucks, we kind of pulled up parallel to the compound. We were just pulling overwatch on it to see, what we could find. We had 3 vehicles, I believe.
3 ODA vehicles.
3 ODA vehicles, and then 2 other vehicles attached to us. So we had 5 vehicles total. Quite a lot of firepower.
About 6 A&A vehicles, but they didn't have firepower trucks.
Yeah, they didn't have the guns attached to them. But as we were sitting there pulling overwatch, we were seeing groups of people leave the compound. And unfortunately, at that distance, we couldn't identify weapons until our first vehicle was engaged. And I think the engagement was kind of to cover whoever was leaving that compound. And as soon as that happened, then it was game on at that point. We had aircraft overhead that could actually see them, see where they're moving to. We engaged them both with direct fire weapons and with the aircraft. After probably about 30 minutes at most, with the aircraft overhead, we kind of identified that there was no more movement, that everything that we have seen moving has either ceased, either was killed or gone. At that time, the commander made his decision that we're going to go across, do a battlefield battle damage assessment. From that point, Robbie Miller kind of took lead. We had a platoon of A&A that we have never worked with before attached to us just so we could go out and do this mission. Because of his skills with his language and just the way he presented himself, he's able to get in there and organize these guys, which was very helpful to us. Organized into a couple groups. We split up, and we actually had to walk into this engagement area. Had to walk maybe about a half a mile to the north, cross the bridge because we couldn't cross the river, and then another half mile to the south just to get into the base of that valley. Robbie Miller, of course, wanted to take lead, and with him being up front, of course, the Afghan forces definitely liked to follow him. Then he had his group of Americans up front, and we had a second group behind him. We got into the engagement area, still not back to where we dropped most of the ordnance, where the direct fires happened. And as they were moving into that area, that's when I believe it was one of the Afghani that saw the person under the tree. Saw one of the guys, and when they attempted to arrest that guy, it kind of opened up everything else. And at that point, that's when we realized that there was a lot more people on the ground. The aircraft, of course, couldn't see anything. There's a lot of trees in that area, being that high in the mountains. Believe it or not, there was a lot of trees. And after so many years of fighting, they kind of understood how to defeat our aircraft and digging out fighting positions underneath rocks. And when that kind of valley exploded, is kind of the word we used before, I mean, that's how it was. It was like a 180-degree circle, all focused on that lead element. And when it exploded, it exploded. It was like, what is going on here? Yes.
At what point were you hurt?
Time is irrelevant when you're in a firefight. Some people believe it was 30 minutes. Some people, to me, it felt like it was about 5 minutes into the firefight, almost immediately. The bulk of the explosion that Chief was talking about. So for me, it felt like maybe 2 to 5 minutes into the firefight, I was wounded. I stayed at my position for probably another 5 minutes before I was able to get back to Chief after I had been wounded.
What did Robbie do then? Can you tell us?
At some point, once I knew we were overwhelmed, and I believe it was right before I had gotten shot, I told the team we need to bound back. so we can continue to engage the enemy. And what Robbie had done was bound forward. And to this day, we'll never know why Robbie decided to move forward when we gave the order to bound back, but I think it was because he knew the consequences had he not bounded forward, or the world of hurt that our team would have been in. When I say the world of hurt, more than just me being injured and 1 or 2 of my Afghans being shot that were with us, I think the team would have been in a lot more trouble than we were had Robbie not bounded forward.
Did you see that?
Yeah, the main thing on this, I was actually in the real element when Major Cusick gave the order to bound back. We'd already set up ours to cover their withdrawal back to us, so we could set up, kind of assess how much is going on there. One, we were overwhelmed, as Major Cusick was saying. 2, we had the trucks with the big weapons on the other side of the river, but by the way we were positioned, we could not use the trucks to help, suppress the enemy. So bounding out of that area, pretty much the only thing we could do until we were able to gain some kind of fire superiority and get back up there and clear the enemy out. Because of that, my group being right behind the first group, I could not engage anyone because they're right in front of me. The trucks were also behind us. The trucks could not engage anything because they're, of course, shooting at our people. So the only, maybe 10 people at most to our front were the only ones that could engage. Of course, I think this was right before you got injured because I heard it over the radio. But yeah, you called them to bound back. There were 3 other people on our ODA that was up there around Robbie's position at that time. And judging just by the way they came back with, the bullet holes in their body armor or their equipment, they were pinned down pretty good. And yeah, Robbie made that decision to bound forward to cover their movement back. I didn't see Robbie bound forward, but I was able to catch the other guys as they were moving in so I could bring them into our position, but they were in a bad place. And if it wasn't for Robbie actually going forward and pulling that fire for them to come back, they never would have made it back to us.
And that was, I guess, the thing when it came down to it. They were able to see by his gun flashes and everything, they could see where he was.
Yes. And that's many of them, when they came back and we're trying to get, where everyone is, how many people we got back so far. They're like, hey, I know he's right there because, he was the only one with us carrying an automatic weapon at the time. And they're able to point that out easily.
So what he did, from everything that you've told me, he saved everyone's life, basically.
Immediately, I know he saved at least 4 Americans. And I don't know, maybe 15 to 20 Afghanis that were up there with him at the time. If it wasn't for his action, many of those probably wouldn't have made it back.
Major, you want to follow up on that?
Absolutely. I can attest to the fact that I probably wouldn't be here doing this interview had it not been for Robbie. He stayed up front, allowed the enemy to take the fight to him, and by doing that, the medevac could land to get me off the battlefield. So
I know immediately. I heard him call out on the radio when he was hit. I had no idea where he was. I did not know how bad he was hit, where he was on the battlefield. If Robbie wouldn't have moved up and continued to take the fight to the enemy, he actually got up and actually made his way back to me himself. He wouldn't have been able to do that from where he was at.
The enemy gunfire was so intense that I needed somebody or something to give more firepower, or in order for me to get back to Chief here at his position. So exactly what Sergeant Major said. The enemy's attention the minute Robbie went hot or started using his weapon went to Robbie and allowed me and the other 3 that were ahead of me to reposition and maneuver so we could gain the superiority.
When did you know that Robbie didn't make it?
It was a little bit after. I had
Accountability when we were at the CCP, wasn't it?
Yeah, when we got you back behind the first place, behind the rock before we went back to the terraces. We got everyone back, and the team sergeant at the time, Master Sergeant Lodiga, was getting accountability, trying to get accountability to all the Afghans because they kind of ran back way past us. we realized we're one American short, and the next thing was asking, okay, who saw Robbie last? Where was he at? And that's when Staff Sergeant Mackey actually told me, hey, he's wounded pretty bad, kind of gave me a general direction where he's at, and I'm like, okay, well, how bad is he wounded? And at that time, he's like, Joe, I think he's dead.
When did it occur to anyone that this might have been an act that would be worthy of medal of honor?
That, you know, when you're on the
Probably,
battlefield, you don't think about that stuff and what guys had done. So when you're on the battlefield, it's awards and what everybody's worried about is irrelevant.
Which one, C?
That gets irrelevant at that point.
Did you get
So,
my instructions?
Honestly, it would
Down then.
probably a good 3 weeks after the event. After, of course, we had to call in other people to help us just to recover Robbie's body. We came back, we had to refit ourselves with the wounded we had. Not only was Major Cusick wounded, but we had a couple others wounded when we had to recover Robbie's body. After that, when we had to do all the sworn statements, actually explaining, you know, what happened, what events actually happened, the time frame of what happened, what we did, that's when you start to, you know, you bring everyone's story together. The interpreters that were with him have their stories. The guys that were with him have their stories. The Afghan soldiers that were, you know, up there with him have their stories. I have what I saw from the back. Major Cusick has what he saw there from up front. The people in the vehicles under the night vision, they see what they have from the vehicles, and then the aircraft overhead, which they had everything on video. And then you start putting all that together, and then you start to realize, like, well, you know, this person really went out of their way and needs to get recognized as such. But, you know, immediately as it's happening, like Major Cusick said, that's the least on your mind right there.
Yeah, you don't have time to think about it. What you got to think about is getting the rest of the men home, how to get everybody back safe, get the enemy out of the way, and then when you get back, when everybody starts talking, is when you realize that Robbie, in this case, had performed heroically. And I was already back in Walter Reed as the dust was still settling. Yep. So to hear some of the talk on what Robbie had done, and when we were out there, we knew Robbie was still firing his weapon and he was doing good things for the team. But not until we talked to the three guys that were up front that saw Robbie bound forward did we start to put the pieces of the puzzle together. Because when you're in that chaotic situation, you really don't know.
We have to kind of wrap it up.
No problem, sir.
For your time and
Absolutely.
there's some other things I need to do here. But from each of you, I'd like to ask of you, what do you think Robbie's legacy is, and why it's so appropriate that he won the Medal of Honor and the state of his home state is honoring him here tonight? Why should we remember Robbie for what he did?
Well, for me, it's a testament as to why I'm here today talking to you. So I know I personally can speak to what Robbie has done for me, what he's allowed me to do in my life. I get to wake up every day to my wife and children because of Robbie. So for me, it's personal, and I know for these two next to us, it's personal as well. But the reason I'm here talking to you today, sir, is because of Robbie Miller.
For me, it's you know, the 2.5 years of him being in Special Forces that I knew him is he was just through and through from the day I interviewed him to come to the team to the day he was sending me emails from over there. He's just a patriot. He's just a flat warrior that loved nothing more than defending his country and believed in what he was doing. So that's what I always take with me.
It's exactly the same thing these two people have said. You have a guy that without question, without thought, gave his own life to save people that he's been working with and people that he doesn't even know. I mean, what else could you do that could be more than that?
Gentlemen, thanks.
Great, sir. Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.